Hi, welcome to the 2016 year-end review from StormGeo of the Atlantic hurricane season. I'm StormGeo meteorologist Dave Gorham, alongside StormGeo's expert hurricane forecaster and manager of StormGeo's TropicsWatch team, Chris Hebert. Now, Chris, I think a lot of folks would think that it was a quiet season 2016, but in fact, we had above average numbers.
We had above average numbers, but they were concentrated in one area from the north central Caribbean through the southeastern U.S. The northwestern Gulf of Mexico was rather quiet.
But if you're on the southeastern coast, you would think otherwise.
You would think
now,
otherwise.
Another great thing about the 2016 season is our track forecast. Now, you talk more in depth of the track or about the track in the coming video, but just perhaps a teaser to tell us what track is.
TRAC, T-R-A-C, Threatened Regions from Active Cyclones, uses computer ensembles to generate a new version of that yellow error cone, something that's based more on the current level of uncertainty than the historical 5-year error trends.
Excellent. Now, before we roll the video, I want one more question answered, or at least a definition, because there is a difference between what StormGeo does and what the National Hurricane Center does. Namely, we're not bound by their guidelines or procedures on when we can issue.
Right. We can issue advisories on tropical disturbances, sometimes many days ahead of the system being classified as a tropical depression or tropical storm.
Excellent point, and a perfect lead-in to the 2016 year in review.
Hello, I'm StormGeo meteorologist Chris Hebert with a look back at the 2016 hurricane season. Now, whether or not the season was determined to be very active or not so active, it's often a function of where you live and whether you were impacted. For example, if you were across the southeastern United States through the Bahamas, you think it was a pretty active hurricane season. However, if you live in the northwestern Gulf Coast area of the United States, then not much activity there, so fairly quiet season. But we did have 15 named storms, 7 hurricanes. 3 of those hurricanes became major hurricanes this past season. And as far as our forecast, well, we thought this area would be quite active. We thought it would be more active, though, in the western Caribbean Sea and into the southern Gulf of Mexico. Didn't turn out that way as far as activity down there, so good news for the northwestern Gulf area. Our forecast from June of this past season indicated that we thought there'd be a significant number of storms in this area with a threat to the southeastern United States. And we also were expecting the northwestern Gulf to be more active. It wasn't as active as we thought it might be this past season. We did forecast 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 majors. We were only off by 1 named storm as far as our predictions for the season totals. Let's start out by looking at the first storm of 2016. That was Hurricane Alex, which formed not in June, but in January. In mid-January, we had a low-pressure center by the Bahamas, tracked all the way across the Atlantic. Didn't develop until it moved south of the Azores, where it became a hurricane, Hurricane Alex. Winds up to 85 miles per hour as it moved toward the Azores. I think it's probably the first time the Azores have ever had a hurricane warning in the month of January. Very unusual storm. Now, the first hurricane during the regular season was Hurricane Earl, which developed in August. It moved into Belize and then tracked on across Central America and into the East Pacific, where it was just a remnant area of low pressure. The first major hurricane of 2016 was Gaston, which formed way out in the open Atlantic, tracked on out to sea. Pretty strong hurricane. There you can see a well-defined eye, winds to 120 miles per hour, but out in the open Atlantic. Let's move on to some of the more impactful storms for this past season. And the first of those is Hurricane Hermine, which formed on August 28th and continued through September 3rd. Max winds about 80-85 miles per hour. We don't have the full report on Hermine, the post-storm report yet. Winds might be even a little bit higher than that. You can see as it approached the Florida Panhandle, a very well-defined eye starting to pop out there on satellite imagery. Well, we first identified what would be Hermine by the coast of Africa as disturbance number 26 way back on August 18th. Now, it progressed westward, and we were thinking it was going to move toward the eastern Caribbean Sea, potentially be a threat there in 5 to 7 days. And on Friday the 19th, the next day, we indicated that we thought that there was enough of a risk for development, or at least a threat to the eastern Caribbean, that we would initiate our first advisory. And we thought it might be a tropical storm by the time it reached the northeast Caribbean Sea. It did look like it was going to be a strong storm affecting the northeastern Caribbean, however. Beyond that point, indicating a track up here, generally toward the southern Bahamas. Where's it going to go? Well, as meteorologists, we look at quite a number of different models. And what I've shown you here is a plot of the American, Canadian, and European models plus their ensemble members. Each one of these three main global models has additional runs with slightly different initial conditions to take into account the uncertainty of the atmosphere in the path of this disturbance. And you can see not a lot of really good agreement if you just look at this spaghetti plot here, some indicating perhaps a track not too far from Bermuda, and some of the members even indicating down near the Yucatan Peninsula and over into southern parts of Mexico. So we can take a better look at that by using our track guidance, our threatened regions from active cyclones, which takes all those ensemble and operational runs together and calculates the probability of the center tracking within 125 miles of a point. And often a consensus of various model runs is much better than any individual model run. And that's what we show here, the track guidance indicating a path across the islands of the Northeast Caribbean and then toward the Florida Straits and into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, which is where Hermine eventually tracked. Our forecast around that time indicating a track near South Florida into the eastern Gulf and hurricane landfall around the mid-Florida panhandle in about 6 to 7 days. The Hurricane Center identified Tropical Depression 9 once the system moved into the Florida Straits just south of Key West here. That's when they initiated their first advisory. We had initiated advisories 9 days before that. So our clients got quite a bit of heads up as far as potential threat from Tropical Disturbance 26 and eventually Hurricane Hermine. Hermine eventually tracked westward into the Gulf. Some thought it might be a threat to the central Gulf Coast, but we never did. It looked like it was going to make that very sharp right-hand turn right toward the Florida Panhandle. It, of course, did that, struck as a hurricane, weakened to a tropical storm as it crossed the coastal areas of the Carolinas, and then a remnant low, mostly an extratropical storm here, some strong winds and some high seas across southern New England, but the squalls were dissipated by the time it moved up into that area. Let's move into the strongest storm of 2016. That was Hurricane Matthew, Category 5, 160-mile-per-hour winds at this point. You can see a very small eye indicative of its tight wind field, a very intense hurricane across the Caribbean Sea. Now, Matthew formed in late September and continued through the first week and a half of October. We identified Matthew over here by the coast of Africa as disturbance number 36. And it looked like it was going to track westward toward the Caribbean. We had a very strong high pressure to its north. Didn't expect it to curve on out to sea as some of the storms ahead of it did. A couple of days after indicating it by Africa, we thought there was a good enough chance for development that we indicated movement toward the southern parts of the Antilles and striking that area as a tropical storm on our initial advisory on Saturday the 24th of September. Now, as it moves westward, it passes very close to the coast of Venezuela, which is where Matthew eventually did track. It became very slow-moving in this area as it intensified and then turned northwestward toward Jamaica and Haiti. The Hurricane Center identified this system as Tropical Storm Matthew as it approached the southern Antilles. Forecast from the Hurricane Center indicating a potential impact into Jamaica. We thought it would turn a little bit before that point, indicating a path between Haiti and Jamaica, and that's where it eventually did track, and then the threat up here toward the Bahamas by days 6 and 7. It's interesting to look at our track guidance, our threatened regions from active cyclones based on the ensembles. And as you can see, on October 2nd, the guidance indicated a path toward eastern Cuba, the Bahamas, and then perhaps turning on out to sea. But a couple of days later, as the storm was still in the Caribbean Sea, from run to run every 6 hours, we saw a trend westward. And you can see by the time it was approaching Jamaica, the track guidance indicating a path very close to the east coast of Florida and then inland over here into the Carolinas. And that's where the storm eventually did track. You can see there passing along the east coast of Florida as a Category 3 hurricane. Now, it didn't strike land as a Category 3 hurricane. It was down to a Category 1 by the time it moved up into the Carolinas coastline. Fortunate for them, but it did produce some very, very heavy rainfall across the coast of Florida and mainly up into the Carolinas where most of the heavy rainfall was located. As far as winds, these are the peak, not the sustained winds, but the peak gusts observed as Matthew went by. Strongest over here at Cape Canaveral, 107 miles per hour. I did not see any sustained 1-minute hurricane force winds, 1-minute average winds anywhere along the coast from Florida through the Carolinas, but certainly we had some Category 1 and even Category 2 hurricane wind gusts. And as Matthew began to weaken and head out to sea, well, we had very strong winds come in his wake as some cool air flowed rapidly down the east U.S. coast, wind gusts at 91 miles per hour. in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So very strong winds, and wind and rainfall and mudslides caused some significant damage, particularly down in Haiti, where over 1,000 people are estimated to have been killed by Matthew as they moved by Haiti. Most of the impacts were on the right side, lesser impacts over toward Jamaica, even some deaths from flooding over in the Carolinas. Very, very heavy rainfall, 15, 20, even I think 25 or 30 inches in some areas of rainfall across the Carolinas. The final storm of 2016 was Hurricane Otto, which moved inland here into the border between Nicaragua and Costa Rica, almost a Category 3. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not upgraded to a Category 3 on the post-storm report, which should be out over the next month or so. Now, what's interesting about Otto is that it continued moving westward and emerged into the East Pacific as Tropical Storm Otto. It retained the name, which meant that it became the first storm that we have on record that was the last storm of the Atlantic hurricane season and also the last named storm of the East Pacific hurricane season. I don't think that's ever happened before. Very unusual event. Let's end with a little bit of statistics as far as our early advisories. And we mentioned that we started advisories on Hermine about 9 days before the Hurricane Center identified it as a depression and began advisories on their own, and about 4 days before Matthew. Well, over the past 5 years, we've tabulated our early advisories. We've issued 121 advisories before systems have been classified by the Hurricane Center. We need to give our clients the most advanced warning that we can, and issuing the early advisories provides that early warning. In most of the cases, the system did develop. Now, in 11 of these 121 cases, the storm did not eventually develop, but we don't only issue advisories when we think something is likely to develop. We also issue early advisories when something is going to maybe significantly impact an area with squalls or heavy rainfall, but not necessarily develop. And that was the case as far as these 11 advisories here. Our development chances on these advisories was less than 50%, meaning it wasn't likely going to develop, but it was going to produce some impacts. Only in 3 of the cases out of 121 did we think development was likely, but the system never did develop. So I think that's a pretty good record, about 98% record there. As far as the timing of our early advisories, with each year we're issuing advisories earlier and earlier. You saw the 9 days with Hermine and 4 days with Matthew. On average, over the last 5 years, we issue advisories about 2.5 days before systems are classified as depressions or tropical storms by the National Hurricane Center. So that gives our client the most warning that we can in advance of potential hurricane threat. Well, let's look back at 2016. I'm hurricane meteorologist, StormGeo meteorologist Chris Hebert. Thanks for viewing.
Excellent video, Chris. I know you put a lot of work into that. A couple things, though, before we wrap up the video. I want to mention trigger reports. Now, trigger reports is a custom report that we do for our clients. Could you talk just a little bit about what a trigger report is?
Right. Back around 2006, we developed some objective tools to help clients navigate through their response plans. Tools like the worst case arrival time of tropical storm conditions or the probability of the winds impacting their location. What we can do is to analyze your hurricane response plan and incorporate this objective guidance into the plan so that you know when the next trigger of your response plan is going to be reached, and you can better plan for a potential shutdown in the event of a storm.
And it's very helpful, especially so on the weekends or holidays or after hours.
Right.
Bring the team together and perhaps lean forward so that you can adjust your schedule if needed based on the phase.
We calculate not only what phase of your plan you should be at now, but when that next trigger is likely going to be reached. You can plan ahead if the next trigger is going to be reached at 12 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning.
Excellent. Contact StormGeo if you'd like more information about trigger reports. Also for 2016, we released our mobile app, StormGeo Alert. You can find it on the Apple Store or Google Play. But Chris, that brings all the benefits of TropicsWatch right to your mobile phone.
Right. You can watch the videos right there on your phone or your iPad or
your site-specific forecasts as well.
Right.
With that, I think we'll wrap this up. For StormGeo, I'm meteorologist Dave Gorham.
And I'm Chris Hebert.
Thanks for watching.